Good morning everyone, and welcome to another out and about video. And today, for the first time in 2023, we're here back at Burnley Cemetery. We're going to look for a memorial headstone today, and it's a remembrance of many people who died in a tragic plane accident whilst heading towards Barcelona back in 1970. Now, many of the dead, and I think there was 112 people, 107 passengers and 5 crew members who perished that afternoon. But at least a third of those victims all came from Burnley, Colne, Nelson, Worsthorne, I think it was Bury, Ramsbottom, Wigan. So basically, the majority of the actual victims came from these neck of the woods, close to where we are today here in Burnley Cemetery. So as you guys know, and the viewers know, that we cover the dark side of life, the dark side of our history. Some of it obviously is going to be quite recent, and it's because of this I've got to put a bit of a warning out now at the start of this video that we are going to be putting some images on, some stills, some photographs of the actual crash site itself, which some of you guys, some viewers may find slightly worrying, alarming, but we feel that we have to show them. Now, these pictures are easy to find on the internet regardlessly, so it's not as if we're digging too deep and trying to be as sensationalist as we can. We're not doing that. These images are on the internet, so we are going to show some images throughout this video. They will pop up as I'm talking, because we feel that, you know, we have to show them, to show the viewer exactly what happened and just how tragic this event was. Now, there is also a documentary filmmaker, and I forgot his name, but he's from Spain, and he's either done it or he is in the process of making a full-scale documentary on this same story. And I will put a link to a trailer that is out there, but I do have to warn you that his trailer is by far more graphic than what the images that we will show throughout this video are. So again, viewer discretion is advised with that as well. So yeah, so it's just a bit of a heads up that we are going to be showing some pictures of the crash site, and obviously it's up to you guys if you want to carry on watching this video. We hope you do, because obviously we're paying our respects best way we can to the fallen, the victims of that terrible accident back in the day. But yeah, just please continue watching if you wish to do so. So it was on Friday, July the 3rd, 1970, when flight Dan Air 1903 departed from Manchester at around, it was nearly 4:10 in the afternoon. I think it was 4:08 in the afternoon when it finally left Manchester Airport. Now, the flight itself, I think, was roughly two and a half hours. But as flight Danair 1903 headed towards its destination, like I said, at Barcelona, there was some kind of air traffic congestion, I think it was, in the skies over Paris. So the flight itself had to be diverted slightly off course. Now, Captain, I think it was Alexander Neil, I think this was his first flight over towards possibly Barcelona, but most certainly over the route he took to make his way to the actual airport, or the final destination. Now, it was whilst they were slightly off course and they were on the path they were told to take, and I think they had to look for a beacon over a mountain range. I think it was called Sabadell, and I'll put all the names below because there's quite a few Spanish, obviously, words and phrases that we're going to be talking about in this video today. So I don't want to obviously pronounce it wrong, so I'll put it down below. But yeah, as he flew over the mountain range of Sabadell, he had to look for a beacon, and then once he'd seen that beacon, he had to relay that back to the airport so they knew exactly where he was, where the plane was. Now, obviously, they've got radars for things like this, but the reason why I'm saying it the way I am is because fate would intervene, if you will, and this is what kind of led to the errors, the catastrophic errors that caused the plane to crash into the mountainside, and I think it's the Montseny or Montseny, again I'll put it down below, the mountain range. There was a lot of mistakes made that afternoon, and like I said, it led to tragic consequences and you know, the loss of life of everybody on board. So as I said right at the start of this video, many of the victims were from the Burnley side, if you will, of the northwest. Like I said, there were Burnley itself, there was Nelson, there was Colne, Westhorn. I think in total there was around 45 victims. So out of the 112, if you include the 5 cabin and crew members, out of the 112 victims, 45 were from these neck of the woods. And this is why we're here, like I said, today at Burnley Cemetery to pay our respects and obviously to visit the memorial that has been placed here at Burnley Cemetery. Now, out of those 45 people, many of them were families. There was a lot of families who sadly lost their lives. There were a lot of young people as well who were on the plane at the time. Some of them 15, 16. There was even children, you know, younger than the age of 6, who perished that afternoon. There was also, I think there was 4 footballers from Padiham, and it was a football side at the time. There were 4 players who also perished that day, along with 3 supporters of the football club. We'll get more into that shortly because we're going to go into Padiham to visit another memorial in dedication of those victims, and we'll talk more about the actual name of the football club and the players obviously themselves, you know, when we get over to Padiham itself. But yeah, it was a tragic accident that really should never have happened. But like I said, there was a lot of consequences, there were a lot of things that went against the captain at the time, a lot of miscommunication, if you will. And it goes to show, doesn't it, that you know, even with technology, even back in 1970, we're talking, what, 52 years ago, perhaps 53 years ago nearly, when this occurred. But even back then, technology was still good enough to I think, to have prevented such disasters. So the plane, like I said, it was directed towards a beacon at a place called Sabadell. But the information that was relayed back to the air controller, basically it had been mistaken for another plane that had crossed paths at the same area roughly at the same time as flight Danair 1903. Now the air traffic controller thought that the plane he was seeing on radar, like I said, was DA 1903, when in fact it wasn't. It was a smaller plane. So he's directed the captain of Danair at this point to descend, I think it was to around 2,800 feet. So the captain, he's done as obviously he's instructed to by the air traffic controllers. And we have to remember, and I have to point out that whilst the plane was heading, or the captain thought they were heading towards Barcelona, the conditions had deteriorated, and I think there was a lot of cloud, rain clouds were forming, and it was making visibility extremely difficult for the captain of the plane, Alexander Neil. Unfortunately, at around 16:08 in the afternoon, or nearly 6 in the afternoon, contact was lost with flight DA 1903. And despite many ways to try to contact the plane, everything fell silent. Now, it was originally reported in the papers shortly after, within the hours after, that they thought the plane itself might have ditched into the sea just off the coast of Barcelona and obviously Lloret de Mar and places like that. But obviously, as they would find out in the hours after the crash and the disappearance of the flight, the plane was, or it was found, I should say, on the mountain range. I think it's pronounced Montseny or Montseny. But the actual destruction itself was horrific. There were fragments strewn about over miles of wooded hillside. Obviously, and I don't mean this to sound graphic as such, but body and body parts were found scattered everywhere. And like I said, there was just no life at all. Everybody on that plane had sadly perished that afternoon. So the plane itself, I think where it crashed, it was only around 12 miles away from Barcelona airport. So this is how close they were to landing safely that afternoon. Now, under Spanish laws, all the victims had to be buried. I think it was either within 36 hours or 48 hours of the bodies being extracted from the crash site. And like I said, this was just down to Spanish laws. And I think they also put it down to contamination, because the Spanish report would say that due to health concerns, this is another reason why they sped up the actual burials, if you will. Now, all the victims, one could say sadly, they were buried in, I think it was a mass grave, or mass graves, not far from where the plane crashed. Now, I can't pronounce the actual small village where these poor people are buried, so I will put it down below. I'm not sure if it's pronounced Arbúcies or Arbúcies, or I just can't pronounce it, but I'll put it down below anyway. But there is a memorial, and the grave of all the victims is in that small village, and thankfully the villagers themselves are maintaining and looking after the grave itself. But yeah, it was shortly afterwards that, like I say, all these victims, all these bodies were extracted. They had to be buried, like I said, within such a short space of time, which led to a lot of, obviously, more pain and heartache for the families of those involved, because they just didn't have the time to either raise funds or to take off work or whatever. I mean, when I say take off work, obviously it's a tragedy. I presume work people would have been allowed to leave if they so wished to. But you know what I mean, it was such a quick turnaround in the funeral itself of all these people. The people from Burnley and all these other areas just couldn't go over to Spain in time for the service itself, which is sad. It is sad, and especially when you can't bring your loved ones back to where they used to live, you know, and have a funeral on your own doorstep where you can visit the grave and pay respects in a more personal and dignified manner. Now, this is the memorial headstone that was put in place for the victims of the Spanish air disaster of 1970. Now, obviously, there's no There's no bodies below, so we're all right where we're standing. But yeah, this is the final headstone, and it says, in remembrance of the people of Burnley and Padiham who died in the Spanish air disaster July the 3rd, 1970. Now I won't read through all the names, but I will scroll down so you can see yourself. But yeah, I mean, as you can see, this is just Burnley and Padiham, a memorial headstone. But apparently memorial services took place throughout the northwest in the consequent days, in Manchester, Wigan, Leigh. I think there was also, well, like we do know, there was one in Padiham, I should say, because we're going to go to the headstone, the memorial, if you will, of those footballers and the supporters from the football side.
Obviously people are coming because it's fresh.
Yeah, and like Vicky says, people are still coming because there's fresh flowers down and it's been maintained fantastically well. But it says at the bottom, the shock was great, the blow severe, we little thought their death so near. Only those who have lost are able to tell the pain that is felt at not saying farewell. So that sums it up. Like I said, the victims' remains are interred over in Spain in a little village, and it must have been painful not to say farewell in the proper way.
Lots of couples there.
Yeah, and like Vicky's just said, there's a lot of, and like we said at the start, there is a lot of families. Straight away you've got Mr. and Mrs. D. Whitehead, Mr. and Mrs. R. Whitehead. You've got Cope. Now I do remember reading about these. Mr. and Mrs. R. Cope, Mark and Paul Cope.
I wonder if that's children.
I think it was. Like I said, you had a lot of, like Vicky's just saying about, obviously children involved.
Because you got Mr. and Mrs. again.
Yeah.
Then the two children, I bet.
Yeah.
G. Whitty. Oh no. Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Walmsley.
There's a lot of poor souls who were sadly taken from us all back in 1970 for no fault of their own, all because of human miscommunication, wasn't it, at the end of the day?
And those Inghams right at the bottom as well, they must be related.
For anyone interested in coming to Burnley Cemetery and finding the actual memorial headstone of the poor victims, it's easy to find, to be quite honest. It's one of the easiest we've found during all the years of doing Days of Horror. But if you're coming through the main gates at the top, just off the main road here, and make your way down past, I think it's some kind of chapel, the headstone is just directly on your right here. And it literally is a 30-second walk from the main gates. And there's some toilets, there's a block of toilets on the building, you can't miss it. But yeah, come through the main gates, past this chapel here, and on your right hand side is just the headstone. Alternatively, if you do what me and Vicky do, we usually park on the old road, one of the oldest parts of the cemetery, right down at the bottom, and then you can take in some of the actual headstones as you make your way over to the memorial. I mean, as you can see, it's such a long stretch of road, if you will, here in the cemetery, but we park up right at the bottom and make our way around and look at some of these beautiful and wonderful headstones. So yeah, if you do have chance, guys, to come on over to Burnley and Burnley Cemetery, just spend 5 minutes and pay your respects for the fallen who sadly perished on July the 3rd, 1970, because it is a horrific story, and it's a sad one in that these poor people, you could say, never got the peace that they should have gone, and obviously been buried back here where the family are. Now, although obviously what happened was truly horrific in every sense of the word, and obviously this is where our channel name originates from, A Day of Horror, the Days of Horror. There are stories that emerged a few months after the crash itself, and that is story of coincidences, if you will, twists of fate, you know, call it whatever you will. But one in particular by a man called Douglas, and I think it's Gill, who was from Shaw over in Oldham. And we read a story where he himself should have been on the plane with his partner and his young son, but he had to cancel it himself because he had an accident of some kind at work, and I think he injured his wrist, and because he wasn't going to get any sick pay from all accounts, he couldn't, I presume, afford to pay for the holiday itself. So he, his partner and his younger son, they never actually set foot on the plane. However, his younger brother George, who was 18, did, and he was accompanied by his girlfriend Norma, who was 17. Now, what truly is frightening with Douglas's story is he recalled his brother George had saying to him leading up to the holiday, and obviously I'm just going to say this verbatim kind of thing, but yeah, apparently from all accounts George had told Douglas, his brother, that if he had heard of a plane going down or a plane crash before he went on holiday, then basically he'd be feel a lot more happier flying himself. And I know that might sound a bit harsh on obviously other people on planes, but George was extremely frightened of flying. He wished, apparently from all accounts, that he wished that he had booked a holiday to Blackpool instead, and obviously he would have gone over on a coach or in a car instead of flying. He hated the idea of flying. So yeah, he was thinking more on the lines of, obviously if another plane went down before his, chances of another plane going down are extremely rare. Now the football club and the players involved were from, or I should say the football club itself was called Britannia Wanderers FC, and apparently from all accounts they had been a successful grassroots or non-league football side back in the 1960s, 1970 season. Now apparently leading up to the holiday, again like all the other holiday makers, 4 lads had been saving up for a 12-week break in Barcelona or in Spain, but they took 3 supporters with them, and like I said, so that's 7 people involved with the football club Britannia Wanderers that sadly lost their lives. Now we're going to make our way over to Paddy Memorial Garden now, because I know there's a memorial headstone of sorts over there, so we're going to go over there and pay our respects to those poor fellas as well. But yeah, it's an horrific story. I mean, you could say all plane crashes and accidents, no matter who is on board, it's always horrific, isn't it? It's always going to result in a heavy loss of life. And I think this story, and especially the plane itself, the Dan Air 1903, it was the first fatal accident that involved obviously the complete loss of life ever on the Dan Air fleet of planes. Now, I'm not sure about the safety record of Dan Air. I don't know the history of Dan Air, but I do know from what I've been reading that this was the first fatal disaster of a Dan Air plane. So again, there's a lot of coincidences, if you will. There's a lot of twists of fate, as I like to call them. A lot of things just seemingly went wrong, didn't it, from the moment the plane set off that afternoon at 4:08 until obviously it sadly crashed in the mountains at around 6:08. So it was here in Burnley Cemetery on the 24th of November 1970, so only a few months after the disaster. A special service took place, and I think it was attended by around 150 family members and friends of the dead. Now, money to pay for this memorial, it was raised by Milan Dynamos, Now I think they were a football team from the Birmingham District Sunday School League, and they lost one of their own members, and that was Colin Taylor. He obviously was lost in that crash as well. Now it was April 18th 1971, and we'll get more into this when we go over, but this is when the stone was unveiled at Padiham Memorial Garden, like I said, in respect and memory of the people who perished, who were involved with Britannia Wanderers FC. But like I said, we'll talk more about that once we get to the Memorial Garden in Padiham. So as you can gather, we've made our way to Padiham Memorial Park, and it's here where there is a memorial stone for the 7 victims who were involved with the Britannia Wanderers Football Club. Like I said, the people who perished in the actual flight. So we're going to make our way around now and find that headstone, and we'll show you guys when we get to it. So this is the memorial here at Padiham Memorial Gardens for, and as it says, in memory of the young people of Padiham who died in the Spanish air disaster July the 3rd, 1970. And as you can see, again, the names, and there is 9 names on there, but we know there were at least 4 footballers and 3 friends, which is 7. But Vicky's just going to have a quick look at what it says at the bottom. No, just can't move it. Have you got it? So, obviously the names of Michael Searle, Peter Helm, Stephen Bond, David Monk, David Lancaster, Malcolm Baker, Geoffrey Taylor, Dorothy Taylor and David Wilkinson. May the wind of heaven blow gently o'er our sweet and sacred spot, where the ones we love are sleeping and will never be forgot. So yeah, so there's 9 names there.
What's that say? Merry Christmas. Oh, so somebody's still leaving? No. See that?
In memories of Peter. So yeah, so people are obviously family and friends. Another Christmas one there are leaving.
Yeah, it was in our thoughts.
They're still leaving gifts, aren't they? But this is the memorial here at Padiham Memorial Gardens. Stephen and pals, always in our hearts. Love Catherine and family.
So you've got Malcolm's family's obviously putting something.
Yeah.
Peter Helm's family and Stephen Bond's family. So it could be somebody else's family because there's 2 more here without names on.
Yeah. So we're going to leave it here in Padiham. We do hope you enjoyed this story. It is dark and we do know it's a sensitive subject. There is still family members alive to this day who obviously visit the memorials here in Burnley and Padiham. But we do hope we've done this story some respect to obviously the dead. Now if you did like the story, please comment down below, tell us your thoughts on it. Do you remember this event taking place? Don't forget to give us a big like, a thumbs up, because obviously it helps the channel grow even more. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We've got stories coming on a regular basis. But in the meantime, as I always say, guys, take care, look after yourselves, and we will be back soon with another tale from our dark but illustrious past. Take care, guys.